Yo, you look like a defensive coordinator or something. Don't let his ass in.
Oh, he's coming. He's coming in hot. Mm.
Who invited him anyway? I said I was going to be here, and he just deboed his ass up anyway. Standard Chris style.
It is, man. There's only one Chris, man. Can't be duplicated.
Thank God.
What is happening
Hey,
with
you
my
having some
video?
technical difficulties over there, Boomer?
Yeah, what's
Probably.
happening with my video?
It
Yeah.
I
probably
look like
recognized your
Britney.
face and was like, no, dog, we need this camera. Oh, there we go.
Ow.
All right. Well, you guys are going to be the one for one podcast starting out. Pretty excited. So this is going to be something I'm going to try routinely for sure, at least weekly. But yeah, so we got Joey and Chris. Joey Williamson and Chris Hodges. There are some real estate agents here in Clarksville, and both of them do extremely well. They work with one of my colleagues in the office, Brandon Ferguson. And yeah, I'll let you guys introduce yourself, and then we're going to kind of get into a pretty cool topic, which I know a lot of people don't know probably a lot about. I can tell you what I understood it for the first time hearing it, and then we'll kind of do a little bit of deep diving to kind of understand who's the kind of clientele, what's the risks of it, and all that. So Joey, go for it, man.
Yo, is there an exorcism happening in your office, Chris? What's up with this light dark thing going on?
I don't know. Is it
Right.
you shall
You
not
look like an ugly
pass?
Statue of Liberty standing up there like that.
Still look better than you.
Facts. 100% facts.
uh,
Joey Williamson. Been in real estate for a little over 11 years. Team leader of the Williamson Home Group. I have the privilege of leading and teaching and guiding the other person on this team, which would be Christopher Hodges. That's us. So that's me, at least.
Hey, Chris Hodges, the other idiot on this podcast. I've only been in real estate for a little over 3 years, but I've been on the Williamson Home Group the whole time. And I would consider, I think, will help this discussion, this other label. I'm an amateur investor, where I would say like, Joey is a bit more seasoned in the investing world of real estate.
well, I think I can kind of say you guys have a very high real estate IQ. I think you guys are very, very well versed in real estate. You guys definitely know the ins and outs, and it's not like you guys don't have commission breath, is what I call it. You're not just going to tell somebody what they want to hear just to get a sale. You're just going to be blunt with them, like, "Yo, dude, this is either going to work or it's not," kind of
Yeah.
thing. Um, but yeah, so kind of the topic I wanted to talk about was subject to, because I know subject to is probably one of the, I guess, and I'll be honest, weirdest things I heard of when I first heard it. Because somebody says, "Hey, I'm going to do a subject to property." I'm like, subject to what? Sell of your house, sell you paying off a vehicle. Like, what do you mean? For some reason, obviously, when I think of subject to, what comes to mind is there's some form of a contingency, right? But they're like, no, dude, it's completely different. So I'll let you guys kind of introduce what a subject to is, and then we'll kind of do a little bit of deep diving in you know what exactly are the risks of it and what's the pros of it, pros and cons.
I'd be curious your risk tolerance versus ours. So you have the
Yep.
investor side versus the lender side. I think it'd be a
Sure.
fun conversation.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think subject to is, I mean, it's been around since the early 1900s. I mean, when people start, I mean, it's been around forever. Um, and it is acquiring a home subject to its existing mortgage, is what a
Yep.
subject to mortgage is. So the deed, which conveys ownership, the promissory note, which is the adult IOU saying you're going to pay for it, those two things run parallel with one another. They are not the same document. So if I were to take, let's take a, I don't know, let's take a realistic example. Let's say, let's say Chris and Daniel are married. Not crazy, right? Something you two have talked about in the past. Let's just say you're married, right? Let's say you're married and I don't know which one of you'd be in the military. Now I'm trying to play this scenario out. Neither. But if you're in the military, that you're supposed to be here for the rest of your enlistment. Fun fact: the Army says, "Hey, in 2 years you got to move." Right. So you've been in your house for a year-ish, year and a half, and you run the numbers, and you're like, "Hey, I don't have enough equity to sell your home." Right.
Sure.
It usually costs people about 10% of the sales price to sell their home. 6% of that coming from real estate commissions, which is negotiable. 3 for who lists, 3 for who brings a buyer, 3 to 3.5% for closing costs, which again is a negotiable tool, but happens in our market 99% of the time.
Sure.
And then that leaves 1% to 0.5% for crap. I wish we'd have thought about that. Right. That's about
Yeah.
ballpark for 10%. Right.
Sure.
So if you don't have that, and now you have to leave, you're stuck with a couple options. You can sell your home at a loss. Nobody wants to do that. You can keep it as a rental, but now you're a landlord by default instead of by intent. Or you could have somebody come in and take your home subject to its existing mortgage.
Okay.
And the way that would work is there's 19 documents that need to be filed or drafted appropriately. And essentially, I get a specific power of attorney for your guy's house that says Joey can speak to Chris and Daniel's lender at, M&T or Flagstar or Wilson, or whoever services your loan, right?
Sure.
Because you're in some sort of financial hardship.
Sure.
Now, the deed, which is conveying ownership, is transferred from Chris and Daniel to Joey. So now I have the deed to your home. But the loan, the promissory note, stays in your name. Right. So those things they continue to run parallel with one another. And there's some pros and cons to it. There's some risks on both sides. I think it's a wonderful tool. I didn't come into it until I think it was late 2 years ago, early last year. I don't remember, to be honest. I've heard it throughout my real estate career over the last, I'd say probably 4 or 5 years. I've heard it here and there, but I didn't get involved with it until the last few years.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, the way I understood it is, and, I know I talked to Chris about it first, and then obviously, I actually asked both of you, and then, Chris kind of piggybacked, kind of led me towards you, and kind of explaining what the subject to is, like what you just said. But the way I understood it, and here is how I see it from the lending side, is a subject to me, is still considered a bigger risk for a homeowner in the aspect of, sure, you don't have to you wouldn't, quote unquote, have to worry about the mortgage because somebody else is essentially helping you or helping themselves rent it out. But at the end of the day, if something does happen, then obviously that, you forget to pay the mortgage, or the renter doesn't pay the mortgage, whatever have you. It doesn't affect, you, the agent or the investor. It affects the buyer. Right. And so, I explained that to a lot of people, and I was like, I'm not a real estate agent. I was like, there are pros and cons. Sometimes this fits perfectly for some people. For some people, it probably doesn't. And so, but the way I perceive it is, you do have that risk of like, hey, if somebody wants to take a dump on you and just say, hey, I'm going to take whatever I can out of it. And then if you don't pay the mortgage or whatever have you, well, again, it's no skin off my nose. It's not going to affect my credit.
I think that's a pretty simplistic way to look at it.
Sure.
Personally. And
Yeah.
I get you're on the other side of the fence. So I totally understand where you're coming from.
Right.
I don't disagree with you. I also don't wholeheartedly agree with that under any circumstance. But I think you bring up a few, I'll call them valid points, because I know where you're coming from. I just don't think they're sincere points. And the fact that I don't think people are scooping up subject twos to just dump on the people, right?
Yeah.
That being said, and I've been a part of a couple deals that I've lost in trying to acquire a property as an investor myself to wholesalers. And that wholesaler will take a property subject to, wholesale it to somebody else who might not be as scrupulous as Chris or I may be as investors. And then I do agree with you in that sense. There could be some predatory behavior, but overall, that's not what investors are here to do. I mean, it does cost money to do a subject to. Closing costs are going to be between $4,000 and $6,000, which is significantly less than if you're going to do a traditional mortgage. And what if if I'm buying your home subject to its existing mortgage, there's chunks there, right, of equity.
Right.
And one of the things you're doing as an investor by taking on risk, because there's risks for the investor as well. Chris, I think we spoke about this yesterday, so I'll pass this ball to you in just a second. But there's risks involved for us as well. And if I were to take your home subject to, and you're kind of on the fence, off the fence, yeah, we really need some money. Okay, cool. How about we do, what if, let's say there's $20,000 worth of equity, right? I'm just making things up here. And I say, hey, I'll take your home subject to, let's split closing cost in half, right? Let's make it a dub for everybody. And then I'll give you $5,000 to help you move. Would that sweeten the pot enough for me to be able to take your home subject to? You say yes, we move forward. Now I have skin in the game, right? I got a couple grand out, and in the contract, it should be written if you're a ethically sound investor, and you explain the process to people that there are outs for them. If I get hit by a bus, or if I forget to make the mortgage, or something happens, you have things that you can do as well. And I'll pass that to Chris if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
And let Chris pick up for a few minutes, so I'm not sitting here yapping the whole time.
Yeah, and I think I think that, Daniel, coming from your perspective, being a loan officer, of course you're not going to like it because it takes you out of it. But I think that similar to how Joey and I believe handle this ethically well when it comes to these subject to purchases. There are risks that come onto the buyer. Now, where I've seen people be like, okay, I can see why that would be helpful. And I've spoken with agents about this too, that just out of ignorance and an unwillingness to learn are scared of subject twos, right? And I totally get it, because even as someone who purchased 2 of my rental properties via subject to, every time I get a subject to creative finance offer from someone in California, I roll my eyes too. So I get it, even as someone who does that. That being said, the risks are twofold, right? One, you're 100% right. It remains in the buyer's credit. But let's take this example of you and I being married and Joey buying the house from us subject to. Well, what if we go and get divorced? And then now, I was really poor with my money and I have to file bankruptcy as a part of that. Not only does that affect you as my loving husband, but also the creditors could try and come from that mortgage that is tied to now the home that Joey owes. Now, I have heard of both sides of this planning out from different investors / agents that are also investors, where one person in particular was like, yeah, they tried to call it. It's not their home anymore. It's mine. So I'd showed bank statements for X number of years, making the payment from my account. I maintained insurance on this. They had it as that agent had it as a rental property. That's good. But then on the opposite note, someone who has got 100 plus rental properties had a single subject to, where the seller filed bankruptcy, and they came after that home. Okay. And so that is an inherent risk. Whereas whenever I think about where would a subject to be most beneficial to truly help the seller out, it's in the inevitability of foreclosure, or they have to bring a ton of money that they don't have in order to sell their house on the open market. Right? I'm in probably 3 or 4 different discussions with agents that have listings that have been on the market for 120 days plus, that are also trying to rent it out for a loss. Right. And they're just like, my folks will do anything to get out of this house. So then I say, well, talk to me about, would you be willing to do a subject to? Because for the investor, a lot of these subject to offers in these 6+% realms, they would be taking the house on at a loss each month. For, they would go and rent it out at a loss. Now, whether that's for tax gain, or they just simply see that from the investor's perspective, this is a low income way, like a low barrier of a purchase price, cash down, in order to acquire this property without having to get a credit check, without having to get, because I think Joey had said it either earlier this week or last week, Joey probably wouldn't get qualified to purchase a house normally, with his portfolio, but he'd be able to show the statements that he'd be able to confidently make these payments for X number of years, right? And so I think that's one thing that often gets missed in the essence of that. And so, another thing that we brought to my attention by another agent that does an obscene amount of subject twos. She's like, us as realtors get held at a different standard, right? If it's Daniel Page, Joe Schmo, but he's a real estate investor, you submitting a subject to, not a big deal. But when Chris Hodges, the realtor, submits a subject to, I think about the second one the first subject to I purchased were from other investors that had kind of offered to teach me how to do subject to, right? So they were happy they're fine with it, right? The second one was I went on a listing appointment and I was like, hey, you're going to make $40,000 off the sale of your home, but it's going to take a couple months to sell it. And she was like, well, how can I go about a more surefire? I need this money. I need $5,000 in 2 weeks to move to California, and I do not want to be concerned about my next mortgage payment. And I said, in order to facilitate this timeline, what I'm able to offer you would probably be subject to, I explained it to her. I explained it to her verbally. And then, thankfully, in hindsight, I went back and sent an email. I said, hey, here's your CMA. Here's a net sheet showing that you will walk away with 30 to 40 grand after everything's said and done. It just may take a couple months. Or here's option B, subject to whatever. And in the email, she said, I want option B. Let me know where to sign. Right.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And I think that that comes to part of the ethical issue of this, right? Is it comes with the basis of knowledge, and then where your true intentions are.
Right.
And so I think that often, due to the influx of external investors into the Clarksville market, it gets such a bad rap because I've also heard of the instance that you brought up to me that I did not know how to solve. I don't know if you plan on talking about that, but that's a perfect example of something that could happen.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's going to be kind of the thing too, is, and I don't, it's definitely not a bad option by any stretch of means. It's just, I think to the normal, and I'm going to call myself obviously normal in this subject because I don't know the total ins and outs of it, right? I'm not the pro. I know very surface level stuff, and you guys would be the professionals. You guys are the pros at this. So yeah, I mean, coming from a surface level view, I do play devil's advocate, and I believe it can be a very beneficial for some people. It's just, I think, and that's why I kind of allude to in the very beginning, you guys do a very good job, and you guys have a very high real estate IQ where you can really help people articulate, what's what, right? I think if your average day realtor would try to explain it, they haven't done it before. I think that's maybe where it gets the bad rep because it comes off very like, yo, I'm just going to take your house. I will pay you money and then I'll get you out of your tight situation, but deuces. And then I'll take it over. And then whenever I sell it, I'll make the money, but I'm just helping you now. Right. And I think, and like I said, I think again, people in a really bad pinch, that's really probably their best option. I mean, truth be told, like, I mean, I know people, it's the same thing. Like, if you wanted to rent the house, some people right now, I mean, you guys know the rental market, it's hard, like for investors, like it's hard to even cash flow a lot of properties. And so, these people, if they're, on the verge of like, yo, I just don't want this mortgage payment anymore. Again, I mean, I've talked to people and they want to talk to me about renting their house. And I'm like, yo, wrong lane. But I can tell you for what your mortgage payment is and where you're at, you ain't cutting it. It's not feasible. So I was like, are you going to be comfortable with, giving up $200, maybe $300 a month in order to keep your property? So yeah, in a situation like this, I think subject to would be perfect because they don't want to deal with that.
I know, but Daniel, let me interject something for a second because I think you hit something that's important.
Yep.
Investors, you got Pareto's principle. Chris says it all the time. I have a different version of Pareto's principle, but you have really good people in your job, right? My thing, instead of the 80-20 rule, I think you got about 10% of us in real estate that are just excellent at what we do.
Sure.
Period.
Yep.
Absolutely treat this as a profession, do it at a very high level, and take a lot of pride in that.
Right.
You have 10% of people you're not really sure how they passed the real estate exam in the first place, and you got a lot of people in the middle, right? Yeah. You just described with an agent that's kind of, hey, here's what we're going to do, hey, blah, blah, blah. think about all the things that Chris and I deal with, and I'm sure you deal with to some extent. But if you have a family that has to move, and then they're, let's say they're technologically challenged, or maybe they just don't know, right? And they happen to have a friend at church that's a realtor, so they go with that person, and that person is part of the bottom 90, or even the 80% in the middle.
Right.
You could very well have the exact same experience you just described negatively about a subject to for the traditional sale of their home, because that person doesn't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. They're not explaining the process, and they're not making sure everybody has all the information to make a good, sound decision. They're predatory, or they're dumb. Or they're lacking technical ability. I don't want to say they're dumb, but they're just lacking the skill set. And I think Chris hit it out of the park with everything he said, but I really do think it gets a bad rap for people who are predatory or just dangerous enough to know what it is because they watched a YouTube video, and then now they're going to come in and swoop in and be like, let's do subject to, and there's no context behind it.
Right. Yeah. And that's why, again, and I think in this kind of situation, I mean, well, realistically, any situation, with our field, we're dealing with I'm dealing with their money, and you guys are dealing with their livelihood, like their house. And so I think, obviously performing at a high level, I think you guys take it a step further, and you guys can kind of lay out everything in front of them. Right. Because I can tell you, when I've asked a few agents about a subject to, they either don't know, or they say, yeah, it's essentially, I'm just taking your house. And I'm like, okay, well, if you put it like that, of course, like it's going to shun everybody away. Like even me, I'll be like, oh, you're just going to take my house? Sure. Yeah. I'll give you a $5,000 check. Don't worry about your payments. I got you. Go, kind of thing.
I'd rather have the first one all day. By the way, I'd rather have somebody like, I don't know what that is. Like, perfect.
Right.
Let's talk. As opposed to the guy who's like, I saw this ad one time. Let's do sub two.
Yeah. So I guess.
Yeah, I also think. I would just like to make a quick note on that. I think that the pride of the agents play a huge factor in that point right there.
Sure.
They have heard of it. They have no idea what it is. 99% of agents are going to say, yeah, I know what that is, and it's not good for my client.
Right.
Which is inevitably hurting their client even more. I have had conversations with agents that said, my client is 3 months behind on it. Right. And I said, okay, here, I was like, and at the time, I wasn't even purchasing home subject to, but I presented, I said, hey, I could probably talk to some people in my office who purchased home subject to, thinking of Joey particularly at that time, and we can stop them from going into foreclosure. Right. And she said, no, I know about subject to, it's not going to help them. And I was like, well, this is exactly what could help them, actually, as a part of that. And so I think that agent pride has a big thing of it too. But then also, the listing agent does have to maintain some sort of confidentiality to the seller. And so I could definitely see some older school kind of agents that, again, are not familiar with subject to, but do this for a very long time, that keep no information about their, seller's intentions, motivations, and things like that. Right. And then again, we as the investor here, or agent in particular, will very rarely have an opportunity to talk directly to the seller in this case, thus leaving a game of telephone. Sure. And again, as you had mentioned, right, this is something that is not complex, but is new to the market that we're in. Right. As people have only heard of the bad experiences, never the good. And so then in order to translate that to the seller, it never ends up being what it could be.
Sure. So, no.
I had piggybacking off Chris for just a second. Mm-hmm. I had a deal that I was trying to coordinate. It was we're just going to say it was at Liberty Park. Is where it was at. Lady purchased her home less than a year, 20% conventional loan, 20 down, right? Been there like 8 months. And she's like, hey, moved here with and/or for my sister. Sister passed. She's like, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm out. I said, all right, run your numbers. Ran the numbers. I'm like, man, you got a decent amount of equity because you put money down. I said, but you don't have any actual time on target, right, with being in the market. I said, we can list it. This is what it's cost 10%. We went over the 10% thing. This is what you're probably looking at. But average days on market is in the low 70s. Average contracted closes in that 40 to 45 day range.
Sure.
You're probably looking at getting a nominal amount of money because you hadn't been there for very long in 6 months, 4 to 6 months. Or we could do something called subject to. This is what subject to is. This is what it entails. You would lose the equity that you currently have, the 20% equity that you have in the home. You're not getting that back. And we went over the whole process. She was interested in it. At the end of the conversation, she says, well, let me talk to my realtor. Perfect. Her house was, and then she says, my house is actively listed. I said, whoa, all right, hold up. I'm not going to continue this anymore. Talk to your agent, see if subject to is something you want. I'll look your house up and then I'll communicate everything else to your agent. Not really happy with my agent. They're not doing anything, blah, 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 blah. House expired. And I said, call me when you're done. So I happened to look up in the hot sheets one day, house had expired. So I called the seller because I had the seller's contact information. She had responded to a piece of marketing that I had sent out. She reached out to me and I said, hey, Jane Doe, let's do this. She said, I've already signed another listing agreement. I said, oh, man. All right. Who's your agent? She tells me. I call. No clue what subject to was. None. And mind you, at the end of the conversation that I'd had before I found out the home was listed with another agent, she told me she wanted to just sign subject to after we'd gone over the numbers. And I literally went over the numbers with her on the phone and said, hey, type 315 because that's how much your home was. Subtract, blah, blah, blah. This is what you get. Are we looking at the same number? Yes. She's like, I'm good. Let's do it. An agent gets involved and she's like, nope. She's not interested at all. And I was like, can you tell me, Agent X, where did we go wrong? Because I think there's some inherent risks. What do you think they are? And what does Jane Doe, what does she think they are? She's like, I'm just telling you she's not interested. And I was like, nothing like an agent getting involved in the mix to just make a win for everybody. But man, it was frustrating. And I think Chris hit it. Yeah. People don't want to admit they don't know. They take it as an ego hit and they don't do anything to actually educate themselves. It's frustrating.
Yeah. And I mean, it's very, I think I've seen it a lot more. Well, it says I'm running out of time. Okay. So we'll go ahead and get ready to wrap it up. But no, I think at the end of the day, it's obviously, you guys have seen or heard of what, how obviously I would perceive it, again, at surface level. But, with you guys explaining everything, I do understand there's definitely an outlet for a lot of people. And it's probably a very great option for a lot of people, just depending on their, circumstance, right? Just like, for us, when it comes to loan products and things like that, well, obviously sometimes people will force one buyer into a different product just because they feel, or just because they don't know the ins and out of another product. And I'm like, well, technically this product would have been better for them, but because you don't understand it, you forced them into this product. So it's definitely kind of the same thing. But yeah, no. So I think I'm going to stop being cheap and probably buy the updated Zoom or the upgraded Zoom. So I have a lot more than 30 minutes. But no, I appreciate you guys coming on. It'll be on YouTube. It'll be pretty cool. I'll send you guys the link when I'm done, and it'll be on Spotify. So it'll be pretty cool.
Thanks. Hey, Jamie, can you pull that up?
Yeah.
Yeah, listen.
Thanks for your time, Daniel. We're available for questions. Agents, if you're reading this or listening to this and you don't know what it's about, we're an open book. We have been the whole time. There's literally nothing we've ever kept close hold to us. Just ask. We would love to help you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you guys, man. I'll have to get you guys back on at some point. So
thanks, Daniel.
All right.
See you, brother.
Later, guys.
I'm off. Every single beef, I had to let it be. Spend a lot of time wasting energy. That ain't made sense to me logically.